I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? I laugh, but you asked me the question of like, what do I give a fuck about right now? And my response was, it really feels like, I mean, it's been a chaotic time. It really has been very chaotic. But it feels like everything in the world is going mad. And then it's also like closing in on, like personal space in a real way for people. And so I'm feeling, normally I'm like just a peace, be easy kind of person. And I'm feeling a little bit more of the chaos. And I'm trying to figure out in which ways. So it's not like direct chaos to me, but like feeling like the rumblings of the chaos and people's responsiveness and reactions to it. I was having a really good conversation the other day about the bombings that are happening over in Palestine, and how there was an interview about the hospital that was just bombed, and they started out saying that it was not intentional bombing or not targeted, and then throughout the course of the interview they said that they thought that they saw some folks that were like Hamas, and so that is why that they did do the bombing. And that just goes to show, it makes me think of when I was in history class and we were learning about Hitler and we were learning about all the atrocities of, throughout the ages, and you get to a place of like, what would you do in those moments? Like, who's the person that you would be in those moments? And it's wild to me that this is happening. And I know we've had this conversation before, but in this moment, I'm really feeling that, and very intensely, like this is happening. And what is it that you can do? I know that you're trying to help a family get out, but it really can be very frustrating to sit around with chaos swarming around you as one human being, and how that impacts because I do feel like I'm in this space of like, what can I do? Do I just start with trying to create my peace, and I'm not even able to be successful with that? So I feel very unnerved in this moment. I really do.
Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I know that I can see by your background that you're back on your island, and I know that that brings great peace to you, and that separation from being in the States and being around all that energetic buzz that happens on this particular occupied territory in the United States brings you some ease in the past usually. But yeah, I mean, we're rapidly approaching day 700 of the genocide in Palestine.
Yeah.
And yes, the Israelis just a few days ago bombed a hospital twice. So they bombed it once. They were in the process of rebuilding it because, as you know, they've bombed, or maybe you don't know, or people that are listening, the Israelis have bombed every hospital, every medical facility in Gaza, and have reduced it all to rubble. And they were in the process of rebuilding this particular hospital, and they struck it again. And then I saw on, the social medias, because I follow a lot of people on the ground in Palestine, and saw a video of someone in Gaza was taking a video of the emergency response personnel who had arrived after the first bombing of the hospital, and who were actively trying to extract people who were still alive out of the rubble so that they could get them to medical health. And the target, that they were bombed. So there was the person.
So you're visually watching.
Visually watching, the person who was taking the video was videotaping the emergency workers, and there were maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them in this cluster, and then they're all gone. And the person that's videotaping is saying, "Oh my God, they're all gone! Oh my God, they're all gone!" And so that was intentional. So it's interesting that you saw interview.
It was a conversation. Yeah, no, it was a conversation that I was hearing about the interview, hearing about this happening.
Yeah,
And
they've been doing this all. Israel's been doing this, all along. They keep saying, "Oh, tactical, oh, mishap in whatever." They love to explain it away and act like they didn't mean to do it, but you just targeted a hospital twice. Once, and
mhm,
wait for the emergency personnel to show up, and then you hit them again. So,
yeah,
I'm sorry. You're definitely responsible for all of that. And it's interesting. I was just having a conversation with my dear friend Elena, who
yeah.
this morning, and she was talking about somebody in her life right now that is exhibiting narcissistic behavior, and we were talking about
Okay.
we were talking about how it manifests and how that looks. And I think this person is also struggling with addiction issues. And so she's kind of coming to an awareness around that and what that might mean for her. And as I'm describing what Israel's been doing all this time in terms of it, it's all very much in alignment with narcissistic behavior in terms of it's not my fault. It's not my fault. That's what she was saying. This person keeps twisting everything around to make everything her fault and not his. And it's like, that's classic narcissism.
Hmm.
And yeah, Israel's been really, really good at that. So it's never their fault
So,
when they bomb.
so let me ask you this question. If Israel is displaying narcissism, what is the United States? How would we diagnose the United States?
The United States is an interesting exercise. So the context of my conversation with Elena, this particular human that she's dealing with is, I think, dealing with some addiction issues. And she kept saying, well, he's such a nice person. He's such a nice person. I said, well, maybe his addiction is bringing out the narcissistic tendencies. And, if we think about, and I've heard other people use the term addiction and talking about the relationship of the US to Israel and how, yes, I don't, as an empire and as a colonial project that's still ongoing 400 years later, I do believe that the US is addicted to power, is addicted to,
Definitely.
and so it's interesting to think about it in that context. Like, we know, most of us know someone who has struggled with addiction. I myself have. And so I know I see things kind of in that framework of what addiction can bring
Hmm.
to a situation where you're just looking at it from the outside and going, why are they still doing that? Why are they
Hmm.
still behaving in that way? And it's not to take away any culpability, it's not to take away any responsibility for the behaviors to say that it's addictive behavior, but it's just interesting to see it in that framework. So, yeah, I don't know. Yes, I do believe the US is a narcissistic society for sure, that we behave in that way of, the world revolves around us. We're the center of everything. When we go to other countries, we don't understand why their menus aren't in English and why they don't want to take my American money and they don't want to, and it's like, because you're in another country that does things differently than we do.
Exactly.
Duh. Um, so yeah, I mean, I hadn't really. That would be an interesting exercise to expound on that because I think we all know somebody who moves through
Oh,
things like
I
that.
know somebody. I know, and we don't have our own like narcissism, that creeps up. So I never want to like remove
Sure.
myself from the responsibility of my behavior as well.
Yeah,
But I would offer in this scenario, when we're looking at how the U.S. is supporting Israel, they are enabling narcissism, right?
absolutely.
And allowing it to grow and impact a larger demographic because of the support and the enabling. And and it really speaks to like the different ways that we set up our relationships. So now like if we're going back into like our individual self and extrapolating it out to what we're seeing that's happening on a global scale,
Hmm.
we definitely see how the US is playing a major part in even helping for them to be more narcissistic and
Yes,
more able to
eating it.
explain their behaviors away.
Mhm.
So it's like a super enabler. I don't know. I don't know if we're making up labels, but I just see the culpability of the US is so strong in this discussion. And I never want to remove ourselves from that reality.
Right.
And and because of that power space that the United States holds in support of Israel, other people who might be in opposition are more cautious about how they are in opposition.
Mm.
And when you're dealing with narcissism, You got to name it. Somebody has to name it, right? Call a spade a spade.
Hmm.
And that is not happening, which is why we're seeing this war prolonged so intensely. But the US is doing that in many places, not just in Israel. Like I always say that the US is being that super enabler. And so it is a check-in with like, where is there going to be an opportunity for somebody to like to check in with where the root of the support that allows this like hyper narcissistic behavior from a nation.
Yeah, I mean, to expand on the metaphor a little bit, I've been hearing all throughout these 700 days of genocide, we've been hearing activists and people who are advocating for the US to stop giving arms and stop giving money unfettered to Israel so that they can continue to do what they're doing. And that argument, we've seen different leaders of administrations. Biden used to do it, and Harris did it, and now Trump does it. He just doesn't care. Goes to this great length saying we're trying, and I mean, Biden used to say all the time that he was in discussions and he was trying to get
Conversations.
Netanyahu to, and then we find out after he gets out of office that no, actually, he wasn't having any of these conversations. He wasn't trying at
Hmm.
all. And if you think about the U.S. as the super enabler, and I think about relationships that I've been in with people who are addicts, and when I was the active enabler, you know, it, I always understand through the lens of my own addiction and my own recovery, and then being around others who have been in addiction, is that as the person who was adjacent to somebody who was struggling with addiction, I know that I stayed in that pattern as long as there was a payoff, even if the payoff
Hmm.
was painful. So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
so interesting to me to think about this
That's very interesting. Yeah.
situation through that lens because, we're looking on the outside in, we're going, you're losing, empire is falling. People are learning how to resist even the most basic things because we are just not okay with the way this country is doing business in within
Business.
the boundaries of our country, but then also outside. And but they don't care. They're still
Hmm.
the people. The they that I'm referring to is the people that are in power to actually impart some sort of change. They don't care. They're so deep in. And again, I'm not taking away their culpability or their agency or their decisions to stay in this pattern because they're doing
Hmm.
all of that. But I know when I was a person who was in a relationship with an addict, even if the responses that I was living with were painful, and they often were, the fear, and I think we talked about this before, the fear of the unknown, right? The fear of what it would
Hmm.
become if I put my foot down and said no more was so terrifying for me in
Prevalent.
the early days
Yeah.
of the relationship. It took 11 years of that marriage for me to realize that I had the strength to put my foot down and say no. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't know how it's going to react. Because in my particular example, he had been threatening me for the whole 11 years. I'm going to make your life a living hell if you try to divorce me. That wasn't the only threat
Hmm.
I got from him, but that was one of the bigger ones. And I remember getting to the turning point where I realized that the threat or the fear of what that would look like, that picture that he'd been painting for me for all those years, that
Living it.
right, the fear of that was not as the fear of that had lessened, and
Hmm.
the striving or the compulsion to want something better and to want to get a lot of it had to do with having a daughter, having a child in that
Yeah.
environment and wanting to get her out of it. I still wasn't whole enough to care about my own safety. I was able to worry about hers. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's so interesting when you think through these dynamics and you think through how it all intertwines and interweaves, and how when we're looking on the outside going, why are they still doing this? Don't they see how destructive this is to themselves and to others? We talked about this with white supremacy. Why do white
Yes.
people still uphold white supremacy when it's just as destructive to us, not just as, can be as destructive to us as it can be to
Hmm.
you know it's the nature of this. And I think our society is sick enough that this addiction cycle, this narcissism, this power hungry, this fear of the unknown, this I'm going to stay with what's familiar no matter how hurtful it is. is the sickness of our society, and
Hmm.
that's why we keep doing
And
what.
you named it, the white supremacy. And that's the thing, like we get into what we're used to.
Yeah.
And until there's some form of a catalyst that shifts, like really shifts us out of what we're used to,
Mhm.
we're going to continue on with it. So
Yep.
all of that chatter that people had, and discussions about what would you do differently in this situation, you are living that you wouldn't do anything differently, that you would keep on existing in the way that you exist. And then you're also being able to see how interwoven the United States is with other regimes. I'm going to call it that at this point,
Yeah.
with other like nations and regimes, and especially with Israel. Like you see how like closely tied, because then you can, because the person was also saying like they're not saying anything on CNN and all that. And I'm like, well, they can, because that's probably owned by somebody of Jewish faith, is the reality of the situation. You know what I mean? And so it's just like,
Just going to push
say it
back
again.
on you that we need to call it Zionist, not necessarily Jewish, because it's not
Okay,
not about
of
Judaism. It's about
Zionist belief systems.
yeah,
I hear.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
And so because of those close interwoven relationships and not really being able to shift power in the way that people would hope that power would shift, so that there was less harm and violence that are going on in the
yeah.
world. But yeah, man, that this is what we're seeing and experiencing. And that also brings me to another part of the conversation where we're talking about excuse me, with another comrade that I was talking to, and that person lives in DC, and they're saying that there's a lot of uprising that is happening in DC, a lot of pushback, specifically to ICE, and actually being able to have like kind of a hold ICE back on its operations and movement, which I think is phenomenal, to be able to see that type of organizing happening in community, and people standing up against ICE raids and the violence, and actually stopping them. So I don't know the details of what that is, and this is a person that like really focuses and follows that type of a movement. So it's not like just like out in the air conversation, but this is like somebody who's like looking at strategy and organizing to see that there is having some really good organizing to stop ICE in its movement. But that's one of the things that the US is also focused on. So like while we're seeing all of this violence and tragedy happening in the relationships that they're holding outside of the United States, inside of the United States, we're going through this like internal struggle with immigration, with social justice policies, with how our money is being spent and where our tax dollars are going.
Yeah, I mean, the expansion of knowledge and understanding that USians seem to be in the midst of is maybe one of the, if there's a silver lining to what we're going through, and we've talked about this before, that, it I think I've told you that metaphor before, that I used to say my kid was like, Oprah used to talk about, you get a whisper, and then you get a tap on the shoulder, and then you get a 2x4 upside the head, and then you get a brick wall that falls on you. And that's kind of the progression of how people wake
Mm.
up to messages that maybe the universe is sending them, to that they need to change something. I always used to say my daughter was a 2x4 kid. She didn't get the whisper, she didn't get the tap on the shoulder,
Dang.
get it before the wall fell on her. But this country, this nation, the US, I believe, is a 2x4, and not our administration. I'm talking about the citizen, the people, the
Mhm.
constituency, the people that live here. We need to wake up, and it takes something drastic to wake us up. And so if there's a silver lining to all of the things that you just named, and more of what's happening right now, it's that it is waking people up. It's getting people to
Mhm.
realize that the things that we have thought were not knocking on our doorstep
Are there?
are they are
Yeah.
indeed
And
happening.
that's what I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation. Like
Yeah,
that, like
yeah.
there's a it's coming closer, because you feel the vibration of the chaos and how everyone else around you is experiencing the chaos. So there's like more interpersonal violence that's happening in the homes, because I don't know what's going on with people at their job. I don't know, but like I'm hearing a lot more interpersonal violence happening, and feeling a lot more of the chaotic like movement of uncertainty that people are existing under. And when there's so much uncertainty, and this type of chaos does have outcomes that are not obviously the healthiest for us to be existing in.
Well, you think about what's happening in DC with the occupation of the National Guard there, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. Yesterday, I think, or maybe the day before, I read that the Federal Department of Transportation is reclaiming control over Union Station, which is the main
Mm-hmm.
train station
Train
in
station.
DC. And I think we talked about before tanks being positioned, and it's all connected. I think the reason that
Yeah.
Trump wanted to do that big beautiful birthday parade thing that he was couching under a celebration of 250 years of this country was because he wanted to get the tanks in DC. Remember, we were talking about
Mm.
how they were going
Already
to clear
getting
the
in.
streets and
Mm-hmm.
everything, and why is it being so ridiculous to create this military parade? It's because he wanted the military in the city, and he, and it was a good excuse to get the tanks there and leave them there. And so, but it's interesting to me that the Federal Department of Transportation has decided they're going to reclaim
Pushback.
because they're saying that the train station is going into disrepair. I don't know exactly what that means, but I think that was interesting because that's Trump's, those are his cronies in his government
Mm.
that are saying, no, I think we'll take it back from the National Guard. I don't think we'll let you continue to have it. But of course, he's talking about Chicago. He's talking about putting the National
Yeah,
Guard
it's
in
trying to move it.
Chicago. I did see, I don't know if you heard that a federal judge has said that Alligator Alcatraz has to close within 60 days, I think, and they're not allowed to bring any new detainees as of the
Mm.
date of that ruling. So I'm curious to see whether or not that actually, because that's not
So
the
you said it was a federal judge, or it's a judge
federal
in
judge.
Florida?
It was a
A
federal judge.
federal judge.
I
Okay,
believe
so
um,
Supreme Court?
not SCOTUS, but a federal judge. So, it's interesting. It's not the first concentration camp that we've ever had in this country, but it is the
Yeah,
most
of course not.
recent and the most obvious. So that's an interesting development. But as you were talking, I was thinking that COVID. I wonder how much COVID, and this might be rhetorical, but I wonder how much COVID had to do with the starting of this waking up for the people that live in the US, not the government, but the people, because so many folks felt abandoned during COVID, certainly
Mm.
by the federal agencies that were supposed to be in place to protect us from something this horrific. And I truly believe, and you can't prove me wrong, and you're never going to dissuade me that Trump's abysmal response to COVID led to at least 100,000, if not more, deaths of the people that we lost because he just didn't want to actually deal with it. So I feel like if we look at the trajectory of everything that's happened in this country in the past 5 to 8 years, that it really seems to have laid the foundation for people to start to really
Yeah.
wake up and realize, oh, and again, I'm not talking to anybody that already knew how messed up this country was. It's only to those of us that usually they look like
That
me.
is like, whoa, wait. So just speaking into that, this brings up my love space, Miss Thelma Crawford, who is my 92-year-old best friend, and had lived through a number of experiences where there was major diseases that have like wiped out folks. Like because she had been around for a long time. And she was saying that in her experience, this always happens and life does continue on, but it does continue on differently.
Oh, okay.
So a very interesting perspective and experience through like the history of the history of the United States in particular on like where shifts come in. And so it makes sense because what we do know about COVID is that the actual COVID strand had been existing for years, years, years before it got to a space where it was really causing a lot of problems physically to human bodies. And so also we know that we had to shift the way that we thought about how we were communicating technologically, how we were doing work business, how are we were doing education, all of these things that are like foundational to the way USCians exist was shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And we're coming out of that, and we come out of that with war. And we know that in capitalism, when you have a war after you've had economic down thrust, you have a war. you just make money because
Yeah,
war is expensive. And so if you're looking at how capitalism plays into something like COVID, you see who is getting the kickbacks from the government after COVID happens, as far as, having a whole bunch of vaccines and corporations that have to, cleaning products, bleach, and all of that, those type of corporations. And you see those corporations also having tax breaks because more tax breaks are going to corporations that exist rather than humans in within our capitalistic economic system.
yeah,
And so all of that, what you're saying, is a part of what has been the strategy when there is going to be a major shift in the way that capitalism is existing. And capitalism is not able to have the same strength that it had before because the supply and demand is becoming so unequal, and you do need a hierarchy, and that hierarchy is eroded. The whole middle part of the capitalistic hierarchy is completely eroded, and
right.
so that it doesn't have the same foundational ability to exist as it did before.
Yeah, when you take out the center, the top
Yeah.
falls, there's no more support.
And when the top collapses onto a whole bunch of angry mobs, that just changes things. It changes things around. You can't.
Yeah,
Yeah. And when you say empire is falling, excuse me, that is what we're talking about.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The capitalistic, yeah. And I mean, I don't mean to suggest, I wonder if we're still, I mean, fascism is already here. We're already seeing it manifest.
Hmm.
It's been here, in smaller forms and in ways that were easy to deflect from in the past. I think it's becoming more and more apparent to people who had otherwise not really seen it for what it was in the past. And so, but I don't know if we're to the point where people are really going to start. I mean, DC's been really interesting to watch. You mentioned earlier the uprisings and things, and people, there were lots and lots of arrests that have been happening for ridiculous reasons. And I saw a video of a woman who was participating as a court watcher, a court observer for
Hmm.
in the
In the
space
protest, yeah.
the people that were being arrested for uprising and being on the streets of DC were coming up for their arraignments and things. And so she was reporting on what she was seeing in the arraignment space, and the judge kept saying, I have to, I can't let you go. I have to keep, I they had changed something to where the prosecutor, all they had to do was say, I'm enacting rules such and such and such and such, and therefore the judge couldn't let the person go. And cash bail is a real thing, and people are still
So
sitting.
now the the observer was being arrested too, is what I'm hearing.
No, she was not. She was just in the courtroom watching, and then you know,
Okay.
reflecting on what she was seeing and how the judge was feeling like their hands were tied, that they were expressing that they felt like this was BS, but there there were certain rules in place that were preventing them from letting people go and not being released on their own recognizance. And so there are a lot of people sitting in jail that either have to come up with the cash bail to get themselves out, or they're creating lots of hurdles for people to have to jump through, even more so than our really messed up criminal punishment system, as we have had it all along. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how people, I was communicating with Dr. Muhammad, who is the gentleman that I'm collecting money for through a campaign, through a Chuffed campaign, to try to get he and his family out of Gaza. And he was reaching out to me, and he says they're having to move again tomorrow. He's in
Hmm.
the city, and they're displacing them again. So he and his wife and his 5 children and his 2 sisters, they have to pack up and move to the south tomorrow. He said the where they are is the bombing has become so intense that
Hmm.
they can't
They
sustain
can't.
it any longer.
Yeah, of course.
And
And where are they planning to go once there is enough to be able to help them evacuate?
they're going to the south. I don't know, just for security. I don't know. Not that anybody is listening to
No,
this. I
out.
really
I
don't.
know that they're no. I know that they're going to the south of Gaza, but when they can actually leave that area, right? Because we're talking about displacement of people from their freedom of movement to exist in the land that they originate from. So
Right.
like where are the types of places that they want to go? Do they want to go across the waters to the continent of Africa? Do they want to come to the US because believing that there's going to be some support?
They want to
Um,
go wherever they can go. Dr. Muhammad is not particular. It's, you know, and he's got a whole group of people that are working on trying to find a country that will allow them in.
receive them.
And
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest problems. But he did say to me today, interestingly enough, he was talking about how much he appreciated, you know, what I was doing, which isn't much. I'm just, you know, holding his money for him and distributing it when I can. And but he said that he wished that the Arab states, what was it, that the Arab leaders would do as much as I was doing.
Mm,
So I believe I understand that to mean that there are quite a few Arab controlled states that are around Palestine that are not
yeah,
wanting to
it
give.
would be the United Arab, right? Emirates? Would it be
No, the
all
United
of
Arab
those?
Emirates are definitely, UAE is definitely not supporting Palestinians to get out. They're actually supporting the genocide. So, um,
Hmm.
and they're certainly supporting the genocide in Congo, I believe. I think Jordan was a place that they were looking to, but right now they're people are reaching out to their countries' administrations all over France, Italy, anywhere that they can that they have a contact, trying to see. And we know that Trump has already said that, you know, they've already frozen any visa
Hmm.
applications for certainly any injured children in Palestine trying to get to the U.S. for medical treatment. Our country, this administration's already said no to all of that. Um, so yeah, they just want to go anywhere, anywhere that will accept them.
Hmm.
I mean, in reality, they don't want to leave the land that they love, their
Of
home,
course.
but they don't see a way between the famine, the forced starvation, and the bombings. They're like, I can't, you know, and they're terrified to go to the aid sites to try to get food because people are getting shot still. That's a real live Squid Game, and you know, it just. And he's already been. I think I said before that he has already spent some time in Israeli detention in the past. I think it was a couple of
Mhm.
years ago, but he's already experienced that and doesn't want, you know. So there's always the risk of that, no matter
Yeah, the trauma of
they
that
are.
happening
If he's
again.
walking through the streets, he runs the risk of getting scooped up and disappearing from his family. And so just the trying to imagine what that's like. You know, your home is gone,
Existing in terror.
everything
Mm,
around you is gone. The bombs are dropping everywhere. You just want to go out. And he's a doctor. He's a nutritionist, so he has been actively trying to get formula to the starving babies, and he's been doing all of these things trying to get food for his own family. But every time he ventures out of his tent,
it's, yeah,
he runs
it's
the
a
risk
risk of death.
of never seeing his family again, and then leaving them to whatever, you know, whatever circumstances that they may have that he feels like he's able to protect them from. It just, you know,
Mhm.
it's a,
So
there are
the
no words.
chaos that I'm experiencing is much less than the chaos that other people are
Of
experiencing.
course.
But
Yeah.
we are all connected in a
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
where that's the vibration that we're feeling. That is the thing that's happening. And I am really looking forward to being in a shift towards something that's like a lot more peaceful and useful.
We can only hope.
Yes, we got it.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your
hard?
day,
Why am I
continue to
so
ask yourself,
attached? Why do I give a
Why
fuck?
Do I Give a
Why
Fuck
do
is
I
produced
give
in
a fuck?
collaboration with Johanna and
Why do
Deanne.
I try
Music
so
by
hard?
Norwegian
Why do
musician
I care so
Water.
much?
See you next time.
Why do